No way. A new point of view points out that Kyle Dubas might have fumbled the bag at the trade deadline. The Penguins are going to be playing another Metropolitan Division team tonight, and the Wilkes-Barre-Scranton Baby Penguins are setting records for their game Saturday against the Hershey Bears, while the Penguins look to continue their string of success against the Columbus Blue Jackets. The Blue Jackets have been a better team than the Penguins this season, but over the course of history, the Penguins have not lost to them very often. So we have a lot to cover here on Penguins Digest. First and foremost, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, Penguins Digest. We're up over 1,400 subscribers. I want to get to 1,500 subscribers by the end of March. So hit that sub button and let's reach our goal together here on Penguins Digest. We got the latest Pittsburgh Penguins news, rumors, updates, and analysis. And today we are going to be talking about Kyle Dubas and his trade deadline that we have mostly praised on this channel, but a new point of view from an insider reveals that Kyle Dubas may have fumbled the bag during the trade deadline. And I don't mean that he made the wrong trades. All of the trades that Dubas made sense, but there should have been more trades. We were so confused when he didn't trade Rickard Rakell, when he didn't trade Erik Karlsson. And now we're still sitting here like, we went on this winning streak, but it's for nothing. It's not like we're trying to get in the playoffs. Sidney Crosby might break a few more records. But was that worth our future? Was that really worth a first-round pick, a top prospect? Let's dive into this, because this is actually a really interesting point that was made this morning in this article that I found on Clutch Points. It's Christopher Hennessy's article from just not even an hour ago. He talked about Kyle Dubas and reasons for concern for this Penguins franchise after the 2025 NHL trade deadline. And the first point that he brought up was that Rickard, Rakell, and Erik Karlsson both have multiple years left on their contracts. Rakell is signed through 2028 with a $5 million cap hit, and Carlson is locked up through 2027 at $10 million. While that does mean that they could be traded this all season or at the next deadline, the value may have never been higher than it was on March 7th. Obviously, Rickard Rakell, one of the biggest names on the market. You saw what happened with Brad Marchand. The Bruins knew, and they are a very established franchise. They've been around for so long. They know how to operate these situations. Brad Marchand needed to go to a team that he wanted to go to, a team that he wanted to play for. They're not just going to trade him to a team to get the biggest return. They had so much respect for him, what he did for their team. It's a different situation than Rickard Rakell. Rakell, you could trade him to any team in the National Hockey League as probably the most valuable asset because of his term on his contract and get an absolute king's ransom. And that's what Kyle Dubas asked for. When he asked for what the return would be for Rickard Rakell, he said a king's ransom. And I would have been fine with that because the LA Kings were one of the teams that were offering a king's ransom. Carolina tried to swoop in and acquire him at the deadline. Dubas didn't pull the trigger. I don't know if it's because he thought he could get more or because he just wanted to keep him. Either way, it might come back to bite the Penguins, because let's look at this example. Rickard Rakell could have got at least bare minimum what the Islanders got for Brock Nelson. The Colorado Avalanche traded for Brock Nelson, and Brock Nelson is not as good as Rickard Rakell. He has 31 goals in 69 games. I mean, Rickard Rakell is on an absolute tear, but Brock Nelson's still a decent player. I'm not 100% sure how he could in any world have more value than Rickard Rakell, and why any team would be more interested in Brock Nelson than Rickard Rakell. He seemed like the cheaper option, and that's why teams were going after him. And that's why the ultimate move was made by the Colorado Avalanche. And let's look at the trade and break it down a little bit. The Islanders received Callum Ritchie, Oliver Shillington, a first rounder, and a third rounder. That is the bare minimum that the Penguins could have got for Rickard Rakell. I think more. But with that said, the Penguins should have pulled the trigger. And that's the thing that this article really talked about the most, was being worried about not going all in a rebuild. The whole point is to go all in. When you're in a rebuild, you have to trade everybody. You can't just keep guys that you want. You have to get rid of anyone that has any value whatsoever. And Erik Karlsson's a little bit different story. Erik Karlsson is a guy that it's hard to evaluate his trade value, but I will say, along with the Rickard Rakell line, Rickard Rakell's value was never higher. I would argue the exact same about Erik Karlsson, because Erik Karlsson played his best hockey of the whole season, not for the Penguins, during the Four Nations face-off for Team Sweden. And he showed NHL teams that he can still, in a playoff setting, turn back the clock, as the article states. So if the Penguins were to trade Erik Karlsson, they probably could have got a little bit more for him because of that recent play being fresh in GMs and owners' minds whenever they were trying to inquire about Erik Karlsson. Now it's a little bit different. Come summertime, yes, it's going to be easier for teams to take on his salary, but depending on the return we can get for Erik Karlsson, Dubas might regret not making that trade at the deadline when the iron was hot. And I like to say that phrase, strike while the iron is hot. Well, the iron was hot. All the trades that Kyle Dubas made during the trade deadline, the only explanation I could find for why he stopped making trades is because we didn't have enough players on our roster anymore. We ran out of players. We actually didn't have enough players to field a team, and we had a game that night against the Vegas Golden Knights. So Kyle Dubas had to stop trading at some point. Cody Glass has been doing good things for New Jersey. We were able to get rid of a lot of key pieces. Matt Grzelcyk's another guy. I was very confused why he wasn't traded away, but Matt Grzelcyk's played his best hockey for the Pittsburgh Penguins, so maybe he gets an extension. But the Penguins cannot get stuck in the middle of this rebuild. That is the moral of this story. I'm going to say it. I say it again. This is the moral of the story. The Penguins cannot get stuck in the middle of this rebuild. You can't just dip your toes in the water. You have to go all the way in. You know you're going to get wet, but you still got to get in the pool. So that's what Kyle Dubas didn't do. He dipped his toes in the water a little bit, maybe put a couple legs in there, got up to the shallow water, but he didn't dive into the deep end. He didn't trade Rickard Rakell. He didn't trade Erik Karlsson. He didn't trade Matt Grzelcyk. And this brings up another key point in this article, and one of the reasons I used this article in the first place. He talked about not taking the best steps for the organization. The business model for any hockey team doesn't account for having 3 Hall of Famers on your team. You got Sidney Crosby, Evgeni Malkin, Kris Letang. They don't have to trade any of those guys in order to make this work. It is a very different situation than a lot of other teams are in a rebuild. You can't normally say you have 3 generational talents on a team that's rebuilding, but because of where they are in their careers, Sidney Crosby still playing at a high level. Malkin has had his moments. Letang has had his moments. We'll have more on Kris Letang in the next video because we actually found some really interesting content on Kris Letang and what he's been working on at practice this week. But right now, it's a lost season for the Steel City. And the most important part is working towards the future, rebuilding this team as quickly as possible. And that means trading everybody that you possibly can and then working on adding in the summer. Instead of now, Kyle Dubas has to worry about who he's going to subtract in the summer. Is he going to trade Erik Karlsson? Is he going to try to trade someone else? Matt Grzelcyk's going to be a free agent. So do we sign Matt Grzelcyk? I would hope so because we didn't trade him at the deadline. But there's just so many questions around this team still. And those questions could have been answered back at the deadline. The last point that was brought up in this article was the Penguins' goaltending situation because Tristan Jarry has been brutal. He went on a run of 4 great games, 4 2/3 if you want to be specific, but now he looks like Tristan Jarry again. I know it was only 1 period, but that was such a bad period that he looked exactly the same as he did all year when he was sent down to Wilkes-Barre. So the Penguins need a goaltender, and this article brought up the same point I brought up a month ago. John Gibson is the man. Pittsburgh native, Anaheim Ducks goalie, has not taken a single step back since I made that video. He is an absolute beast. He would turn around this team entirely. John Gibson is the answer. We need John Gibson. Kyle Dubas, make it happen. I will make 10 more videos about John Gibson if I need to get those out there to get John Gibson on the Pittsburgh Penguins because that has been long overdue. Now we talk about the Penguins versus the Blue Jackets to wrap up this video today. A little bit of a preview of the game tonight. We know as Penguins fans, we have not been good against the Metropolitan Division at all this season, but the one team that historically we have had a lot of success against is the Columbus Blue Jackets. We don't lose often to the Blue Jackets. The Blue Jackets might be better this year than they ever have been, but we are still superior to the Columbus Blue Jackets, so we have to take advantage of these kind of games. And the Penguins are playing a team that is bringing a losing streak with them. So the Blue Jackets are actually in the midst of a skid right now as they were trying to make a playoff push. They are on a 5-game losing streak right now, and the Penguins could have just as easily been on a 5-game winning streak if they didn't collapse against the New York Islanders. So this is an interesting matchup, a team that had been hot up until the last period of the last game and a team that had been ice cold for 5 games. So the Blue Jackets, an interesting matchup to begin with because of the history. As you look at this, the Penguins are 28-32-10. 6 wins. 6 wins against the Metropolitan Division this season. 13 losses and 4 OT/shootout losses. And then, the Penguins, 26-6-5 when scoring 3 or more goals. So I think that's the key number for the Penguins is scoring 3 goals. Last game they had 2, and things kind of took a turn for the worse. So if you get those 3 goals, you put yourself in a good position to win, even with the goaltending. And an interesting stat on the Blue Jackets, they have a decent enough record against the Metro Division, almost 500, but they are 6-6-8 in games decided by 1 goal. So they don't like those close games. They've lost 8 games after regulation, so they're going to overtime quite a bit whenever games are decided by 1 goal, and that's really, in the grand scheme of things, only 8 games the entire season that have gone to overtime, considering that they have to be decided by 1 goal. So I guess it's not that convincing of a stat, but it's still interesting nevertheless, because these two teams are very closely matched up this season, at least. Last time they played, the Blue Jackets won 4-3 in a shootout, and that's exactly why I mention it, because Dmitry Voronkov scored 2 goals in that win, and that was one of those games where the Penguins defense could not keep Blue Jackets out of the crease. That was just a rough game to watch, but the Penguins should have won that game, and they should win this one tonight. They've had points at least in 14 of their last 15 games against the Blue Jackets, dating back to December 12th, 2019. I mean, 14 of 15, that's a pretty dominant stretch for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Since the Metropolitan Division was formed in 2012, Pittsburgh has dropped the season series with Columbus just once, and that was in 2014 when they went 0-1-1 that season against the Blue Jackets. But overall, 21-3-4 in the last 28, dating back to 2017. So a lot of success for the Penguins against this Columbus franchise. And let's look at some stats that are coming up for the game tonight. Erik Karlsson, who we already talked about in this video, with his goal on Saturday, now sits just 3 points away from tying Marcus Naslund for 9th most points by a Swedish-born player. So that's an interesting stat on Erik Karlsson. And we have a few more. Carlson enters tonight's game just 1 goal shy of reaching the 200-goal plateau in his career. Among active blue liners, he has the 2nd most goals. Among Swedish-born defensemen, only Nicklas Lidstrom has more career goals than Erik Karlsson. And he is just 1 assist shy of recording his 10th 40-assist season, and that would be 7th most by a defenseman in National Hockey League history. And the final note on Carlson, 1 point away from hitting the 50-point mark for just the 9th time in his career. When he reaches the mark, he will become just the 15th defenseman in NHL history to have 9 or more 50-point seasons. Now we talk about a few other players on the Penguins that are close to some milestones. With his assist on Tuesday against the Islanders, Kris Letang is 1 point shy of tying Sergei Zubov for 23rd most points in NHL history among defensemen. And then since being dealt to the Penguins at the deadline from the Maple Leafs, Connor Timmins has brought some offensive production that we weren't really expecting. He has 4 points in 5 games, and he has a +7 rating, which leads Pittsburgh and is 6th in the entire National Hockey League. So Connor Timmins has been a great addition. Evgeni Malkin enters tonight's game with 10 points in 13 games since returning from the break of the Four Nations faceoff. On Saturday, he tied Anze Kopitar for the 13th most assists for a single franchise in NHL history, and he's just 1 assist shy of tying Henrik Sedin for 12th place. So a lot of assists for Gino, but Sidney Crosby continuing to rack up the accolades. Another goal on Tuesday. Over the last 5 games, the forward is leading the NHL in goals with 5 and 2nd in points with 8. Dude does not age, no matter what. Crosby ages like fine wine is what I should say, because that dude just gets better. The Penguins captain has been on an exceptional run, especially at PPG Paints Arena. This is the last game of the homestand. He has points in 11 straight home games. So, hey, if you guys are cooking up parlays, put Sidney Crosby point on there, because he has been on fire. During this point streak, he has 6 goals, 10 assists, 16 points in 11 games. And 11-game point streak is 3rd in the league for active home point streaks among all players. He has 63 points in 44 games against the Blue Jackets. Only 2 players in NHL history have more points against Columbus than Sid the Kid. And his points per game average is actually 3rd in NHL history as well, minimum 20 games played, behind Nikita Kucherov and Joe Sakic. So Sidney Crosby putting up video game numbers per usual against another team that he has a ton of success against. I mean, we talked about his success against the Flyers, against the Islanders, against the Blue Jackets. He just destroys everybody, and he scored multiple goals in a game against 31 different teams, which we talked about that stat a few videos ago. Unbelievable. What he does is just unbelievable. I can't even... I just get lost for words sometimes talking about Sidney Crosby, one of the greatest players ever. But thank you guys for watching this video. Hopefully the Penguins can get the job done against the Blue Jackets tonight, a team that they should absolutely beat, and they weren't able to last time. So trying to avoid the 2nd time ever losing the season series to the Columbus Blue Jackets. But thank you guys for watching this episode. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll see you on the next episode of Penguins Digest.